All right, good afternoon. My name is Hannah Mackover. I am one of the program officers with the grant making and technical assistance team at BCYF. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We are so happy to see you. This afternoon, we will be talking about completing the Form 990 as well as establishing program evaluation processes. So with that being said, if everyone could just share your name, your organization in the chat so we know who is in the space with us, that would be wonderful. As I said, the session today is being recorded. So the recording will be made available on the BCYF website. And I do want to acknowledge that because we are covering two topics today, it will be kind of an overview of both topics. And we want to encourage you to take advantage of some of our one-on-one and small group offerings between now and when the application closes next week, if you are wanting to get more information on both of these topics, because we definitely will not be able to cover everything this afternoon. So with that, I look forward to hearing all of the information this afternoon, and I will turn it over to Miss Amy Culp.
Thanks, Hannah, and welcome everybody. As Hannah mentioned, we are taking a 30,000-foot view of the 990 today. And if you have additional questions and would like additional time, I encourage you to sign up for some of those group TA sessions that we are offering. My name is Amy Culp, and I am a management consultant with Expand Now. I have over 25 years of experience working with nonprofit organizations, and currently I work as an account executive with an association management company. And basically what that means is that I serve as the executive director for 3 separate nonprofit organizations. So those of you who occupy those roles can appreciate the work that's involved. I was looking at the chat, and Hannah had asked that you share if you have any experience working with the 990. And I saw folks introducing themselves, which is great, but I did not see comments. I'm going through now, comments specifically about the 990. So I will do my best to, sorry about that, Hannah. If you want to pop in there now, if you have any experience working with the 990, and if so, which form you typically file, that will help me to tailor a little bit of the content today, maybe spend more time on some of the forms and details and less on the others. So I will give you a second just to go in and populate that real quick. And you can just tell me if you do the postcard, the short form, or the long form. So you can put postcard, short, or long. Okay, while folks are thinking about that, Hannah, if you could maybe just update me when we get a little bit further through and let me know what the outcomes were, that would be terrific. Okay, so a real quick overview of where we what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the purpose and the benefits of the 990. It isn't just an exercise because the IRS wants us to spend time filling out yet another form. We're going to talk about what the different forms of the 990 series are. We're going to cover some terminology and tips. We're going to talk about deadlines. Not really sure why are these showing up properly on your screen, because I'm seeing only part of the information. Are you seeing that, Hannah?
I'm seeing the same screen as you. Yeah. I think resources and Q&A got cut off.
Yeah, we're going to cover some words of caution. So just some cautionary statements, and then we're going to talk about Q&A, and I'm also going to provide some resources and some links for you. So just a cautionary disclaimer statement as we head into this. I'm going to be covering the 990 through the lens of an executive or a manager. I am not a CPA, actually, nor would I want to be, nor am I an accountant or a bookkeeper. I do have probably close to 20 years experience working with CPAs and tax professionals and filling out the 990. So I'm very familiar with the requirements and the headaches and the ins and outs. If you have specific questions related to what forms you need to file, how to answer specific questions, etc., I will do my best to assist you with those during the 990 TA sessions. However, if I am in a gray area at all, I will ask you and encourage you to consult with your tax professional or a CPA, because I would not want to give you misinformation. So, who has to file this 990? If you are a tax-exempt organization through the IRS, and for most of us that's going to be a 501c3, if you have been approved, so you have that letter from the IRS that says you have 501c3 standing, or if you have applied but have not yet received approval as a 501c3, you must submit a 990 every year, even while your tax status is pending. The 990s are filed most commonly by 501c3 and 501c6 organizations, but there's a host of other types of organizations, such as civic organizations, foundations, grant-making organizations who also file the 990. So what is the purpose? Despite its appearance, if you've looked at the 990 short form or the long form, it looks like a tax filing document. But if you think about it, we are 501c3s, so they aren't assessing us for how much tax we owe. What they are looking for is they want information not only on our revenues, our expenses, and our assets, but they also want information about our programs. The 990 is actually a return that's for the benefit of the IRS, but also for the benefit of the public. It serves kind of as a protector, if you will. It ensures the public and it ensures the IRS that 501c3 organizations are conducting the business. They are working on their mission. They are providing the activities and services that they said that they would, that you said you would, when you submitted for 501c3 status. Now, interestingly enough, in addition to the numbers, they also ask about our relationships with our board members, our relationships with our employees, our contractors. It's almost like who you're in business with. They want to make sure that everything is on the up and up and that nothing violates a nonprofit status. And then the last thing that they're looking at is your governance structure. They want to know who your board members are. They want to know if the board members are getting paid, and if they are, how much. Again, it's all this idea of making sure that you're operating yourself as a 501c3 and you're working on your mission and serving your communities. As I mentioned in the beginning, there actually are some benefits to completing the 990. It is open for public inspection, so people, donors, funders, general public can go to the IRS website and look at your 990. They can also ask you for it. And under 501c3 status, if a member of the public comes and asks you for your most recent 990, you need to comply and provide it to them. And the benefit of the public having access to your 990, to all the things that they gather, is that it shows potential donors and funders how your organization works. What are you spending on programs versus overhead? What is it about your tax-exempt entity that shows that you're complying with tax laws? And it also shows that you're willing to be governed. You have a board of directors who are serving and watching over what you're doing. It also lets you brag about what you're doing. So you get to say, here is what we said we were going to do. Here is what we are doing, and here are all the valuable services and things that activities that we're providing to our communities. So there are 3 different forms within the 990 series. The first one is the 990N, and your gross receipts, which is all the money that you take in during your tax year, any money that you take in, whether it's for donations or grants or even maybe interest that you accrue on a bank account, all of that is reported as a gross receipt. If your gross receipts are $50,000 or less, you are fortunate in some ways because you are allowed to fill out the 990N, and we're going to go through these in more detail in just a second. Then the 990 Easy, if your gross receipts are $200,000 or less, and your total year-end assets are under $500,000, then you can file the short form. You have to be able to say you meet both of those. So let's say your gross receipts are under $200,000, but your year-end assets are higher than $500,000, that bumps you up to the long form. And then the long form, which is what we just call the 990, you will file that if your gross receipts are over $200,000 or your total year-end assets are over $500,000. So if you are able to file the 990N, good for you. It is an electronic postcard, and it has to be filed online. You cannot file a paper form for this. But the good news is that the information that you see on the slide there, that's all the information you have to provide. Your employer identification number, which is the same as your tax ID, your tax year, and for some that will be the calendar year, some will do a fiscal year. You provide your legal name and your mailing address, and then any other names that your organization uses, particularly for fundraising. So if you say, if your organization is called the best nonprofit in Maryland, but you sometimes use Maryland nonprofit best in, right? Then you would have 2 different names because you're doing almost like a doing business as name, and they want to know what they are. You'll name your, give the address and name of your principal officer, your website if you have one, and then you just have to provide confirmation that your gross receipts are $50,000 or less. For just a second, I'm going to skip over the short form because I have an idea that the majority of the folks on the call are able to file the short form versus the long form. But I did want to give you a snapshot and just kind of an overview of what it entails. The long form must be filed if your organization, again, meets those thresholds for gross receipts or net assets at the end of the year. If your organization has applied for 501c3 status but has not yet received it, you also must complete the long form. There are, because hence the name long form, there are actually 16 schedules that are attached to the 990 long form. But many organizations, like us individually, when we file our taxes, there are tons of schedules that we don't have to fill out because they don't apply to us. The same is true for the 990. The only schedule that all 990s, or I'm sorry, all nonprofits must fill out if you are doing the long form is the Schedule O. And the Schedule O is nothing more than a blank lined form where you provide supplemental information about other questions on the 990, or if you need more space to brag about your organization, you can use it there to elaborate about your programs and your activities. As I mentioned before, I have quite a bit of experience working with CPAs and tax professionals in filling out the 990. If you meet the threshold for a 990, particularly if your assets are over 500,000, it's likely that you are going to need tax assistance from a CPA or somebody who is well versed in all of the tax codes around nonprofits, all of the schedules, et cetera, et cetera. And it isn't terribly expensive to have a CPA do your 990, particularly if you have if you've kept really good books and really good accounting records. Okay, so we're gonna take a step back to the 990 short form. The sections 1 through 5 are required of all organizations. And then again, because you all are 501c3s, you must also do section 6. And Hannah, I think we had queued up the link to this form. Are we able to share it on the screen, or am I just walking through it?
Okay, I can pull it up. Lillian also shared it in the chat.
In the chat. Excellent. Okay. So while that's getting pulled up, so part 1, as you can see on here, is it's asking about what you would expect, right? Your expenses, your net assets, your revenue. Part 2 is the balance sheet, and part 2, you as well as part 1, you should be able to get from your CPA, your CFO, your bookkeeper. This is just basically the cash that you have on hand and your assets. And we're going to walk through some of these a little bit further in detail in a second. Part 3 is where they ask about your program services. And again, this is what they want to know. What are you doing with this tax exempt money that we are letting you have and letting you raise? What programs are you offering? Who are you serving? If the money is coming from a grant, they want to know that, and we're going to touch on that again in just a second here. Part 4 is where they ask about your governing board, whether that be a council or a board of directors. They ask for their name and their title, and they want information like how many hours a week, are they getting paid, etc. And then part 5 is a series of questions. And this is where it gets more and more technical, because they talk about this code and that code, and you have to answer yes and no. And if you answer yes to something, you may have to fill out another form, etc. But again, for those of you who qualify for the short form, most of your answers here are not going to require you to do additional work. And then in part 6, this is where they're going to ask for things like who your highest compensated employees are. Who are you doing business with? Are you doing any lobbying activities? Who are your contractors? Again, who is doing the work and how much are they getting paid? And I will, again, get a little bit into a few of these a little bit further when we talk about some of the terminology, which is actually coming up next. And if we can go back to the slides, that would be great. Wonderful. So again, we talked about gross receipts. This is the total of all the revenue that you've received throughout the year. And this is based on your calendar year or your fiscal year. So if your calendar, your January 1 to December 31, if your fiscal, most common that I've seen is July 1 to June 30, although some organizations follow more what the federal government does, which is October 1 to September 30. Your total assets, that's your balance sheet. So that's mostly going to be cash on hand, investments. It may include some property if your organization owns anything. And then also if you have booked any invoices where you're doing accounts receivable. The grant revenue, this could be a little bit tricky. So on the 990, it will say grants and contributions. However, the definition of grant revenue for the IRS is you can report this, and you should report this as program revenue if your organization is getting paid for providing a service or a product that primarily benefits the group that's paying you. So for instance, this grassroots grant, right? So BCYF is providing these grants, and it's for the benefit of youth in Baltimore City. The majority of the services in the programs that are being funded by the grant benefit BCYF in their mission. And you are addressing your mission through providing the services. So again, it becomes grant revenue. If in doubt, just ask, who does this benefit? An example of a grant that would not fall under grant revenue might be if you're getting paid for infrastructure. So if somebody comes along and gives you $100,000 and says, go, rent a nice space and hire some people and buy equipment and train up your staff, that kind of thing, that would be not grant revenue. That would fall under grants and contributions. And then lastly, key employees. So key employees and key contractors, your highest paid, typically the definition is over $100,000 in reported compensation, either on their 1099 or their W-2. You may not have anybody who falls into this, in which case you might just decide you can report your 3 highest compensated staff or contractors, even if they fall below that $100,000 threshold. Okay, just some quick little tips here. As I mentioned earlier, 501c3s completing the short form should also complete the Schedule O. Even if you do the short form and it doesn't reference the Schedule O is basically, again, a blank slate. It gives you a place where you can brag about what your organization has been up to. How many people are you serving? How many programs did you offer? What were your outcomes? How did you impact your communities, etc.? You can also use the 990 as a roadmap for running your organization. And what I mean by that is that the 990 asks some very specific information and questions about your organization and how it's run. For example, I know it asks if you have a conflict of interest statement and agreement that you ask your board to complete annually. Now, it's not required. If you say no, it's not going to jeopardize your status. However, a lot of the questions on the 990 are written because they are considered best practices. And as you become more adept at what's in the 990, it can give you some hints and some pointers of ways that you can improve either your governance or your management or your administration. It sounds really odd to say this, but the IRS equates good governance with tax compliance. So if they see an organization who is meeting regularly, who is monitoring itself through policies and procedures, whose board is engaged and active, the optics are that if you are that diligent with how you run your organization, that you are being just as diligent with your fiduciary responsibilities, which is really at the crux of what the 990 is trying to accomplish. I have always found the most effective and efficient way to complete the 990. There are 2 key points. One is to delegate. So even though you may have been assigned the task of doing the 990, it doesn't mean you have to do all the sections yourself. Chances are you're going to need to delegate to your staff, to your board, your CEO, whoever that might be, to assist you. So your CFO or your bookkeeper would have the financial reports that you need, your balance sheet, your assets, your expenses and revenue for your tax period. Your program managers, ideally, will have access to the numbers of programs and the activities and who you're serving and how often you're serving and the level of work that you are doing to accomplish your mission. And then your CEO or maybe your board president would be able to assist you with governance questions about board meetings and how often they've met, who the board is, term limits, and all those kinds of things. And then lastly, one of the best friends for you is going to be organized and well-maintained records. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a QuickBooks software program. If you're able to do your bookkeeping with a spreadsheet, as long as you're keeping those records up to date and they're reliable. Your program records, you may already be doing monthly reports, say for your board or for another grant organization. Keep those records at your fingertips and keep them updated, and think about how else you can use them beyond just a monthly report. Real quickly, filing deadline. So if you're on a calendar year, that's January 1 through December 31, your filing deadline is May 15th. As you're completing your 990, if you get any idea or any concern that you're going to miss the filing deadline, complete the form for an automatic extension. And it's a very short one-page, I need an extension, here's my information, and you submit it, and it's an automatic extension to November 15th. And then if you do a fiscal year, it's your year end plus 5 months and 15 days. For example, if you are on like a July 1 to June 30, your filing deadline is 5 months and 15 days, which puts you at November 15th. If you want an extension, it gives you another 6 months on top of that. So very easy. Most of the organizations I've worked with, the CPAs automatically file an extension, even if they don't need it. It's just in case, so that it's filed early. A few words of caution before we get into our Q&A. So if you are a newly formed organization and you're still waiting for approval of your tax exemption, you should still file your 990. That will keep you up to date and current with the IRS, even as you wait approval on your tax status. If you happen to fail to file by your due date or your extended due date deadline, you may incur some cash penalties by the IRS. And then lastly, if you fail to file for 3 consecutive years, it is really likely that the IRS is going to revoke your tax exempt status. If you are in a gray area at all with the IRS, maybe you didn't file one of the last 3 years, I encourage you to seek tax guidance from a tax professional and get current with the IRS. We are all in the business of doing good, and the last thing we want our mission to be threatened by is being out of compliance with the IRS. And then another word of caution, which I was reminded of today, is before you file your 990 short or long form, you are required by the IRS to provide a copy to your governing board. Now, your organization may have internal policies. Some I work with require the treasurer to review and approve before it's filed. Others, all you have to do is send it to them for their information prior to doing the final filing. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. It looks like we have, oh goodness, we went right up almost against the 4 o'clock. My apologies to Sharon. Are there any questions? Hannah, are you seeing anything in chat?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. If anyone does have a question, you can either unmute or share in the chat. Or if you prefer to send a private message to me, I can read that question out loud. I'll maybe give 30 seconds or so for anybody who has any questions, and then we can turn it over to Sharon.
And just one word of recommendation is that if you have not been listed with the charity listings such as GuideStar, Charity Navigator, and Charity Watch, I encourage you to do so, because funders and grant giving organizations will often consult these listings when deciding on how to give funding. And these will be provided in a resource document also as part of the TA assistance. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time and look forward to the next section with Dr. Sharon.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I think this was just so helpful, particularly when we're thinking about Maryland, which is really unique, particularly when it comes to paying board members. If the nonprofit has paid over $600, then they're required in our state to report that information. So I think that this information has been just really helpful, and I think you're actually quite on point when you're talking about, I think that majority of the people that are watching and paying attention are organizations that could use or will be using the short form. So as we kind of talked about kind of fiscal responsibility, I want us to also talk about kind of continuing our conversation that we had a few weeks ago in reference to designing a winning program, because part of that also includes being very intentional about your program outcomes. And so we're going to be talking about not only how you demonstrate that, not just in writing or like an elevator speech, but how you really do are changing your mindset and really thinking of your program design, your program objectives, and your outcomes. And that's what this is going to focus on today. So we're going to explain the importance of evaluation, particularly as it relates to the program outcomes that we have outlined, and really explore the difference, because it's almost like apple and oranges. Program objectives, how is it really different from your program outcomes? Then we're going to talk about different ways you can look at your evaluation. One of the things that I particularly like in the 90s, we start really looking at not just kind of starting an alpha, omega, beginning and end kind of assessment of evaluations, but even incrementally. You can look at the logic model as an example. So we'll look at how organizations may want to establish their program outcomes incrementally and really look at them over time. We'll also talk about how do you actually interpret your outcomes, and then how do you report it? One of the things that Amy emphasized is that when we talk about public money, and when we talk about nonprofits, we're talking about fiduciary matters. We're talking about stewardship. We're talking about being ethical. So you need to publicly be transparent and sharing those outcomes, not just with those who are funded your nonprofit or your organization, but also thinking of the fact that a 501c3 says you're not paying federal taxes, right? You're not paying state taxes. So that is so you can concentrate on your volunteerism, recruitment, as well as funding to actually go towards your mission. So really making sure that we are transparent, but what are the best strategies of reporting our program outcome? And then lastly, I'm going to share with you evaluation is not just a methodology, but it's an approach that really emphasizes the importance of being culturally relevant and really infusing equity through every stage of any evaluation process. And particularly when we're thinking of BCYF, which equity and racial justice and liberation is are so important to them, we want to emphasize that. So as you recall, like I said before, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about designing a winning program design, I was really emphasizing your idea, that idea that is unique to you. It's in your hand, and you were able to kind of say, this idea is investment worthy. Let me put it in a program design. You want to have value, investment worthy program design. That's just one part. Today, we're going to focus on the program outcomes, which actually assess and measure the value, right? We're going to put actual determination. Did it work? It didn't work. Or maybe some of those aspects of it work. As you implement it, it's one thing to design a program, it's another thing to implant it, and it's another thing to actually implement it. And that's when we're going to be looking at the program outcomes. So an evaluation, we evaluate things all the time. And sometimes we, unfortunately, I think we become scared when we're being evaluated or when we're having to evaluate something else. But an evaluation is simply, is it working, right? Is this new picture I put on my wall, is it really giving me the vibes I'm supposed to have? Is this hairstyle the way that I really want it? It's an opportunity for you to reflect about a decision that you made or an action that you made. And one of the things that we do when we're talking about program design, right, and we're developing those program outcomes is to evaluate how did it work? What was that process? So we have to investigate, we have to monitor, we have to document, and we have to publish the effectiveness of whatever your program intervention was, or whatever those outcomes, another word for that is results, that we had already planned that we wanted to do. And again, asking simple questions. Did it work? And with an evaluation, you want to also assess, did it work and why? Or why didn't it work? And why? That why is so important. Sometimes, particularly for new programs, they're really nervous. And I'm not taking any of that away, but I'm asking you to rechannel that nervousness, because there is no such thing as perfection. One of the great things about an evaluation, it's not to bring you to shame. It's to be honest, because when you find out that something did not work, or something you weren't even expecting to work, all it does is enhance your program design. You can pivot and become even stronger next time. Also, funders really want to know the truth, so don't feel embarrassed. It's a learning process that you're evolving over time. The evaluation gives you an honest perspective, what you planned and implemented. So don't necessarily think just because we didn't hit that mark that we weren't successful. That you're successful when you're growing. You are successful when you are evolving. More importantly, your organization and your program outcomes are successful when we do the evaluation, when you're being forthright and honest about that level of growth. So beginning with the first session, we really focused on your goals and your mission and your values. And then we went to like your program objectives. But now we need to really emphasize that all three of them have to really align. Because if not, that disconnect makes your evaluation process really out of whack, right? It isn't that continuum that it really needs. And so I want to kind of demonstrate in the next few slides for you what I really want to focus on. What is an outcome? And what are different types of outcome? I wanted to change my hairstyle, right? What is the end result? That's what I'm looking for. The effect it's having on me, my personality, right? If I wanted to purchase a new car, the same kind of aspect you'll be looking at. That's what an outcome is, a consequence, an end product. It could be things that are tangible and things that are not tangible, right? Noticeable, the obvious. But then there are also some intangible things in reference to like changing of my mind, right? The way I'm viewing a situation. That's why when we talked about outcome program objectives before and measuring them, we talked about quantitative, which you're looking at the numbers. But qualitative is that you're bringing that context to explain the numbers. And a lot of nonprofits are really entering into what we look at when we talk about evaluations is a mixture of both. A little bit of counting the numbers, but also conversations or focus groups or interviews or brother circles or youth circles, women's circles, to kind of have the participants give us more detailed information to explain and to enrich our understanding of the numbers that we collected. So it could be responses or changes or sense of empowerment, right? Or capacity. Sometimes outcomes can be positive, and that's great. Sometimes they can be negative. That's also extremely helpful to see what worked, what didn't, or what component could we improve the next time. Sometimes there are no changes. That doesn't mean that your idea was wrong, or your program design was wrong, or your program objective, but perhaps you needed more time, or there may need to be some pivoting or expansion in reference to your intervention, what you're planning to do. And all of this can be found when you're doing a forthright interview, when it's, a forthright evaluation, particularly when it's designed correctly. So to achieve that, we need to make sure that the alignment of those program objectives are really clear, measurable, realistic with those program outcomes. And what we're looking at is based on those objectives that we decided, those measurable objectives that we decided, one was what we intended or expected. The other is what we actually achieved, right? So did the people actually who received your services, the youth who received your services, what did they experience? What didn't they experience? What was the result of those participants? We're looking at the results. We're looking for change. We're looking to see if what we designed and expected and wanted to measure, how did the numbers really come out? Let's say that I wanted to go on a diet and lose 20 pounds, and I had a process, right? I started and I was doing well. But when the end period came, what were the results? Did I gain weight? Was there no change at all? Or did I almost lose it? Maybe I came to 15 pounds, maybe 10 pounds of losing it. That's why the program outcome really needs to be, just like the objective, measurable. But the lens that we're looking at is different. The program objective is looking at, this is what we are planning to do and what we believe will be the outcome. The achieved outcome is very different. This is the result of our program. So yes, it is like having oranges and apples. Both are fruit, both are important, both are nutritious. However, they speak two different things. Program objectives are intended and specific results that you are planning to explore and experience, right? The outcomes isn't just a plan, right? It's really what did happen, what was done. Now what kind of behavioral change or actions or knowledge has been accomplished. So let me focus on what we did last time. We took a hypothetical community in West Baltimore, Walbrook Junction, and we hypothetically said that because of the high incidence and trends of violent crimes, gun-related crimes, you had a lot of children that were being shot or even murdered, right? Because of it. And there was a lot of mental health trauma as a result of it. This was all hypothetical. We developed objectives based on what we intended to be the results. They were reasonable, they were measurable, right? But if we were to look at the program outcomes, this is once this mental health treatment intervention takes place, what was actually achieved. Again, the orange and the apple, both fruit, but very different. What now do the youth who participated in our hypothetical program design based on those objectives, what do they know now? What didn't they didn't know before? Their thoughts of change, the outcome of the change, That is why while they are related, they're not synonymous. They're different, but they have to be aligned with each other. Apple and oranges. So I'm going to take that same Walbrook community in West Baltimore, that hypothetical, which they said that weekly they would have 10 to 15 children between the ages of 5 and 17 receive 1 or 2 hours of free mental health and wellness counseling. Their counselors would be culturally relevant, aware of the community, very knowledgeable in the area of gun-related trauma, whether it's primary or secondary. That's the objective. Let's look at some types of outcomes. And remember, results we want to achieve is the objective. The outcome is, after we put in this intervention, what were the results? This is how we have the objectives, and this is how we evaluate our program. So one of the outcomes we're hypothetically saying, based on this one objective, is that children between the ages of 5 and 12 years of age average 1.3 hours of free mental health services a week. Okay, it's pretty good. But remember, our objective was from 5 to 17. Let's see something else that hypothetically could have been a result outcome, that the teens actually had more time in reference to receiving that. Now, these are positive, but what if we're looking at it and we only had, it was in the reverse, it wasn't positive outcomes. It's still important for us to know, because it's like an investigator. You're kind of delving in when you're looking at evaluations to see what are the factors that contributed to us not meeting our benchmark. Were we kind of stretching too high? Maybe next time we need to kind of learn from this data, this assessment from our evaluation. A fourth one is that 71%, and this is a national statistic when we're talking about marginalized communities, and particularly looking at gun violence related trauma among children and youth. Once they have culturally relevant services regarding their health, their mental health, and their wellness, we see that they feel less shame about getting services, about seeking services. So this number is really comparable when we look at it in the real world, as opposed to just hypothetically looking at the Walbrook Community Association that we kind of made up. And that 63% now of teens have rated their mental health wellness as a first or second priority. This is an example of how you can look at your objectives and have real clear outcomes of quantifying the results based on what you planned and then based on what you achieved. Again, the orange is the planning process. It still has to be realistic. It still has to be attainable. And the apple are the results, what we achieve. We do not want to be embarrassed. We want to be transparent and always have on the lens of, how can I be a better learner? Because I want to serve my community. So I'm not going to be perfect in this particular process. And a lot of people sometimes feel like we didn't win or we didn't do well. And that is far from the reality. I was going to say, I don't know why it's not clicking. Types of changes: understanding or enhanced perspectives. I have a better knowledge. The experience itself. So you want to make sure when you're developing not just your outcome, but your evaluation, that you're able to do that. Attitude changes, my thinking process, my reactions to things, my ability to assess or self-assess. And if we were thinking about the last example that we had, we did that. I think before, and I would say particularly when we looked in the 60s and the 70s, people were taking that alpha omega, the beginning and end. Let's start it and see if it's working. But now people are looking at things incrementally. So what if our hypothetical organization did a short-term perspective? Let's say within 1 month, this is what we want to recruit and have. And we want these 5 children and youth, right, between the ages of 5 and 17 to have the free services. You can then, if you find out, wait a minute, we weren't able just to do 5, we did 10. You're learning something along your journey. There's midway, right? Ways that you can look at your program outcome. And again, looking at increases, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's an increase or you successfully met that mark. You may also find that you may have to pivot or make some changes. And that's why I think that that is extremely helpful. And then last is long-term. This is like the logic model, so you're kind of like, you know, what we want ultimately to achieve, that we did do this. Along this incremental process, you can pause, self-assess. Also, I think particularly when you're a new program, it helps you kind of realize, if I would go back to the weight loss, okay, I said 20 and I've only lost 2 and I'm in it for 3 weeks so far. You can adjust, make changes to enhance your success in you meeting that goal that you have. So once you have, for example, I don't know why or whatever, the screen doesn't have the language. We probably should have went through them, but we'll make sure when you have it that you will. But I'm just going to go over it real quick. So this first one, this box is identifying the community need. So you have to do some assessment before you even design your ideal program. The second one is to kind of draft and define it based on what you thought in your research, and then talking to the community, what was needed. You design your program, you evaluate your program, right? You develop that, you implement it, you interpret those results, and then you report and publish it. It is important that not only your funder, but include the community that you're working with, include the individuals that were part of that process. Please be transparent in sharing information. And then last is making some improvements. Again, throughout this whole process, we're talking about learning and evolving and making improvements in what we have. I personally feel it doesn't matter who I'm working with. It is important to have a written report, but also when you're doing a presentation, make sure you're using not just a bunch of narratives, because it can be boring, but visuals can be extremely impactful. This is just an example of a cover page, you know, your introduction, a summary of the findings, a table of content, your finding, highlighting lessons learned. This is where you're being transparent and honest, promising practices, and then your recommendations for next steps as you move forward, reporting it. That may be the packet that, let's say, your funder requests a final report. But what if you're giving a presentation to new funders who want to add and expand your great program idea? Visuals as well as data can be extremely helpful in that process. And then lastly, I just want to talk about culturally responsive and equitable evaluations. One of the things that we have found is we are evaluating people that we do not understand, communities that we do not understand. And we're often looking at it from a white European or middle class perspective. And so it's important that we understand community. So I have a link in reference to learning more about CRE, which stands for Culturally Responsive Equitable Evaluation. But it's not just the methodology, it is approach, it's a level of integrity, where from the beginning that you're even designing your program to how you collect your data and report it out, you are respecting the people that you are evaluating. They are involved. It doesn't matter. You are inclusive. When you develop your information for your evaluation, you want diverse voices. You want, when we talk about that equitable lens, you want their lived experiences. So yes, maybe somebody wants to count how many people came to your training. But for what we call CRE, we want to know the experiences of those individuals, not just the numbers. Life experiences, lived experiences. Talk about the community strengths. So often when we look at evaluations, you're the least likely, you can't, it says that you're 1 times more greater than or less than someone else. Talk about what the community wants. Also talk about those areas that need to improve and how. And you want to be relentless in your pursuit of justice and racial equity across the board. You want to look at the root causes. and be able to help in that process. And so hopefully many people can look a little bit more into this new, I think, incredible process in reference to culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. And so we're going to take time. I know that you've had time to think about Amy's a wonderful presentation. There may be some questions that you have for her, or if there's some questions or comments that you have for me, let's have this dialogue.
If anyone has a question they'd like to ask, feel free to unmute or again, share in the chat, either to the whole group, or if you feel more comfortable sharing a direct message to me, I'm happy to read it to the group.
Okay, that sounds good. I do have a question, and if no one else does, just kind of curious, has anyone started working on their program outcomes, actually kind of quantifying and measurable and reasonable, based on their program objectives, what the results they really want to achieve, not just what they're planning to receive, which is that orange, but what they want to receive? Has anybody started that process yet? You all are like my students, really quiet. You can't hear crickets. And sometimes I sense that people really overthink evaluation, right? It's not just, agree, disagree. You're making an assessment about, is it working? Is it not working? Is some aspects are working and it's not? We're always making assessments. We're always critically thinking, right? My students, I overheard them talk about who had the best fries, right? And I'm thinking, and you all say you don't like evaluation. And they were saying, it used to be, Chick-fil-A, but now it's Burger King. And I'm thinking, really? But they were really doing evaluation, but they don't like talking about evaluation because sometimes I think the verbiage and the words, it seems very scary. And I really don't want it to be. And there may be individuals that are still kind of processing this out. I really encourage you to come to those one-on-one sessions when we'll be delving in, or to those small group sessions, which I find to be really intimate because we're all there ready to learn, right? Ready to be helpful. And then we can talk more specifically about your organization. But just like the one that we did in reference to designing it, please do not allow you being unfamiliar or some of the verbiage that's being used to scare you. Don't. We're here to help. We want to simplify the process because we really do want you to be successful and bring forth the best application, right? Not just with BCYF, but any funder that you have the bravery, right? The boldness to go for, to enhance the quality of life for youth in your community, right? And so that's what we're here to do. But I'm going to pause just in case somebody has chatted anything, but we are here available for you.
I did actually receive a question, just asking more so for if the group sessions are open to all and if they're pre-scheduled. So that actually is a great segue into what I wanted to discuss. And again, if questions about the 990 form or program evaluation come up while we're wrapping up, please send them in the chat. But since this question was posed to me, I do want to share, first of all, just a reminder that the application does close in about, is that 9 days, 10 days from now on, April 7th at 5:00 p.m. That's Friday, April 7th. So, to be taking this time now to really finalize and finish your application. But to answer the question I received, we do have one-on-one and small group application support. They are open to all applicants. They are free. They are an amazing resource. Our experienced TA consultants are providing amazing support for our applicants. One that I really want to highlight, we do have a session scheduled for tomorrow. We have a slot tomorrow afternoon, either 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. or 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., specifically to go over the 990 and other admin issues with Amy. So again, as she mentioned at the start of this session, we did a very condensed, shortened version of the 990. So if you're looking for some more support and guidance, tomorrow afternoon would be an amazing opportunity for that. The QR code is on the screen, so you can take your phone and it will pull up the link for that. Or Lillian also sent the link in the chat as well. So you can register for those sessions. Additionally, there are some other group sessions available in that Calendly link, as well as some one-on-one sessions that are available, some slots that are open. And there is an option to request additional time slots for a one-on-one if the slots that are listed that are still open on Calendly do not work with your schedule. So there are tons of options there. And I'll give folks a second to look at that QR code or ask any other follow-up questions there. All right. And then I am going to go ahead to this final page, which has a QR code for our evaluation survey. This is our final TA session for this series of technical assistance for the 2023 Grassroots Fund grant cycle. We would love all of your feedback. Again, Lillian has dropped the link in the chat as well. Your feedback is extremely helpful in developing these sessions for next year and just reflecting on the work that we did this year to help prepare applicants to apply for the fund. So I want to say thank you to Amy and to Dr. Sharon. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your wealth of knowledge with us this afternoon. I will be sharing the slides will be put on the website. We'll make sure that they're the correct ones with all of the information in there, as well as the recording from today. And thank you everybody for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.